Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2014 Ford E350 chassis, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the SumoSprings for the rear axle. So driving a motorhome, as many of you probably already know, is usually anything but a pleasant experience. The suspension is usually really loose, and when you have a vehicle of this size and you're going down the road, that's what you don't want. You know, you end up going down the road kind of getting tossed around. These things catch a lot of wind, and a lot of times you can feel like you're not in control. And honestly, who wants to deal with that when you're going on a long trip? Generally speaking, when you have your motorhome out, you know, you're going to be putting some miles on it. And so anything you do to make that experience better is well worth it, in my opinion. And so by upgrading your suspension components is really going to help make that experience much better. And what that's going to do is primarily stiffen everything up and eliminate a lot of that body roll. Now, if you're unsure what body roll is, I'm sure you felt it, but whenever you're going around a corner or making a kind of a wide turn, you know, you can feel that motorhome. It's so top heavy, kind of leaning as opposed to turning and being responsive how you want it. And so by upgrading the suspension, it's going to help eliminate that and make it more comfortable to drive and feel like you're in more control. So talking about it is one thing, but actually getting out on the road and driving is a completely different story. So before we put our parts on, let's go ahead, run through our test course and see how our motorhome does. That way we can kind of compare our before and after, you know, if the enhancement actually did make an improvement. So kind of get straightened out here, and we're going to go over some bumps and we'll see how this thing does. And pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of expected that. Once the back of the motorhome goes over the bumps, you know, it's really kind of swaying side to side and getting tossed around. It's just kind of loose. You know, it's not responsive at all. When we hit this bump, you know, we can feel that sway back and forth, and it takes a while to kind of steady out and get going straight again, if that makes sense. So definitely room for improvement there. And so I think the suspension enhancement will definitely help. So at this point, we'll go ahead and run through our slalom course and do some evasive maneuvering. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to do here, because this is more of a real world driving experience. So I'll gain a little bit of speed and get turning. And when I make these sweeping turns, pretty bad, actually. Motorhome feels like it just wants to lean more than it does turn, and that can be a problem. That's a little unsettling, because if you do have to make an emergency maneuver like this, you want everything to be responsive and you want to be confident when you're making those maneuvers. So I feel like definitely room for improvement, and we'll see how our enhancement does the job. So now that we have our parts on, let's go ahead and run back through our test course and see if there's any improvements. So I'll go ahead and get going here. I'll straighten back out. And again, we're just going to run through our bumps first. And I like to get going kind of over one or two. That way we can really get the motorhome moving, get a good comparison. And definitely an improvement. The motorhome is a lot more responsive. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still, you know, a little bit of body roll and things like that. We're not in a race car, but you can definitely tell a difference. It's the roll that we get is a lot less. I'd say probably at least half of what we had before. And just the response time of it, you know, recovering is about the same. So if it were me, definitely something I'd look into, at least, you know, when going over these bumps and everything else. But like I said a moment ago, You know, the slalom is kind of more of a real world situation, and that's what I'm really looking forward to do, to see if we have any improvements there as well. So now that we have an open area, we can do some more evasive maneuvering, and I'll start to pick up a little bit of speed, kind of get through this section here so I can make some more sweeping turns. And our first cut, that was good. And much better, actually, way better. Way less body roll. Our motorhome felt like it was more planted and, you know, just much more responsive. When I was making those turns, you know, the motorhome was going that way. It didn't feel so top heavy, and when I pointed the wheels in a direction, it went there and solved that issue of kind of wandering around and being top heavy and loose. So definitely an improvement on that side as well. So this is what the SumoSpring is going to look like once you have it installed, and these are a very simple concept and they're really effective actually. What it's going to do is fill that void in between the bottom of your frame rail and the top of your axle. And what that's going to do is provide us with continuous support, as opposed to the factory type jounce bumper that our SumoSpring replaces. This more or less doesn't do anything. All it's going to do is prevent your suspension from completely bottoming out. And so the SumoSprings are really going to make a big difference. They are progressive, and so what that means is they're going to change how aggressive they are, more or less, depending on the load of your vehicle. So if you have a light load back here, let's say maybe you got your fuel tanks pretty much empty, they're not going to be as firm. That way you don't have a super bumpy ride. On the other hand, let's say if you're really weighted down, you know, these are going to compress accordingly and provide us with that additional support. And what's really great about them is the fact that they're maintenance free. So once you get them up here, you're not going to have to worry about them really. You don't even need to think about them. You know, you're not going to have to come back and fill them up with air like an airbag or make any adjustments, things like that. You get them in place, you're done, and you know they're going to work. Now, something I do want to mention, these are going to have a weight carrying capacity of 1,500 pounds, but keep in mind that's just what these can handle. If you install these on your motorhome, you're not going to gain additional weight carrying capacity that your motorhome can actually carry. So something I just wanted to throw out there. Something that is really common with a lot of our motorhome customers is that they get additional suspension enhancements, and I always recommend that because it really does make a world of a difference. And that's exactly what our customer did today. They also got a Roadmaster rear anti-sway bar, and you can use all these parts in conjunction with each other, and that's what's great about them. And if that's something you're interested in, improving your ride even more, definitely check it out, and you can find it here at etrailer. So to begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our motorhome, and we're going to be working right above our rear axle. Now you want to raise your motorhome in a way that the axle is going to hang down. All right, so you'd want to jack it up by the frame. That way the axle will hang down and you'll have another inch or two of clearance in between the top of the axle tube and the bottom of the frame rail. I was able to position my lifts here in a way that it would give me that clearance, but with that being said, first thing we're going to need to do is remove the factory type jounce bumper that's located just above our rear axle tube on the bottom of our frame rail. So this is our factory type jounce bumper, and super easy to remove. If you look inside of the frame here, there's going to be a stud that comes up with a 15mm nut on it. All you're going to have to do is take your wrench and remove that nut. Now I want to mention as well, anything we do to this side of the vehicle, we're also going to repeat on the other side because it'll be set up the same way. So once we have the nut completely removed, we can take our jounce bumper off and set it to the side, as we will not be reinstalling it. So now I figured it'd be useful just to kind of go over all of our components, because it's going to be a little tricky to see once we kind of have everything up together. What you're going to do is make sure you grab the side-specific bracket. All right, in our case, we're working on the passenger side. So you got passenger side one there. This stud is going to go up through the hole in the frame rail where our jounce bumper originally bolted to. And when that goes through the frame, you're going to take a flat washer and a nylon lock nut, thread those on. That's going to hold this bracket to the frame rail. Then what you are going to do is take your SumoSpring. One side will have a threaded hole in it there, and you want to line that up with this hole in the bracket. So the one that's closer to the center and closest to the rear of our vehicle. So it'll bolt on there like that. You're going to take this type of bolt and thread that in. And that's what everything is going to take to stay together. But with that said, let's go ahead and first start by getting our bracket installed. So now we can take the bracket that we talked about, put it up against the bottom of our frame. And when you do this, you want the open side here to face towards the center of our motorhome. So we'll hold that in place, take our hardware, the flat washer and the lock nut. We'll get this started hand tight. And then we'll come back with a 14 millimeter and tighten it firmly against the bottom of our frame. And we can go ahead, grab our SumoSpring and work that into position like we talked about. Get it lined up. Take our bolt and get it started hand tight. So once you get that bolt started hand tight, you want to make sure to come back with a 14 millimeter socket and snug it down. Now we want to make sure to torque the bolt on top of our SumoSpring that's holding it to the bracket to the amount specified in the instructions. I don't have a ton of space here, so I'm going to accomplish that by using what's called a crow's foot. It's going to allow us to kind of sneak in there and get that bolt tightened down. So I went ahead, did the same thing over here on the driver's side to get this spring in place. One difference was, in our case, we had this bracket here that was attached to the jounce bumper stud. So whenever we removed the jounce bumper, this was freed. And then I simply just placed that over our spring bracket stud, put the nut down the same way, and this is how it all turned out. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the SumoSprings for the rear axle on our 2014 Ford E350 chassis.